I'm gonna show you how I make my chicken bone broth. It's cheap, healthy, and super simple to make. First of all, let's talk about the difference between chicken stock and chicken broth. Stock uses the bones, so sometimes it's called bone broth. It's touted as this miracle food lately, but I can't get behind sipping a mug of this stuff as a beverage. If you can, wow, all the more power to you. Okay, then a normal broth uses just meat for flavor instead of bones. Stock or bone broth, it has more trace minerals, more fat, more protein, obviously more calories because it has more fat, but it's a more nutritious food. So by simmering the bones, we're gonna be pulling collagen, gelatin, magnesium, calcium, all other kinds of trace minerals out of the chicken bones. So when you open a carton of chicken broth that you just buy from a store, it pours out like water, right? Because that's basically what it is. It's chicken flavored water. Whereas bone broth, when it's chilled, it's pretty gelatinous. It jiggles like Jell-O. And that's a good thing because you have cooked all of that good stuff out of the bones. Now, all you need to make this bone broth is chicken bones, vegetable scraps, and water. So I'm gonna be doing this in my crock pot. You could do it in an Instant Pot or on your stove as well in a stovetop pot. But I'm gonna give you some pointers for those options along the way. But I'm gonna get going in my crock pot here. So I roasted 2 chickens in my oven last week. And then after I took all of the meat off the bones, I put all the bones and skin into my crock pot here, along with any kind of pan scrapings from inside the oven, because, I mean, you understood that, right? Scrapings off of the roasting pan, I'm not scraping out my oven. That would be weird. But there's a lot of good roasty flavors on the pan, so make sure you get all that good stuff, get it into the crock pot or whatever cooking vessel you're using. And then I tossed it in my fridge until I was ready to make broth. So you can use bones from meat you've already cooked, or you can just use the chicken carcasses from rotisserie chickens too from the store. That works fine. I like to do this with the bones of 2 chickens, but you could just use 1 if that's what you've got. Then I like to add onion and carrot and celery to my broth. But in order to save money, I just use scraps for this. If you don't have scraps laying around, by all means, like chop up a carrot, an onion, some celery, and throw it in. But when I'm prepping vegetables for other meals, I put my scraps in a bag in the freezer, and then I pull it out when I'm ready to make broth. So this is my bag of carrot peels, onion skins, and celery stalks and leaves. So I'm going to put this in my crock pot with my chicken bones. It's gonna be a bit of a tight squeeze here, but then I'm going to add water to this. Thankfully, my bones are not also frozen. Otherwise, it might be a little bit hard to fit it all in here, but I'm just going to smush it up. And now I'm gonna fill this with water. I've made sure to leave about a centimeter, maybe half an inch here, so that when my liquid is simmering, it's not going to start sputtering all over my counter with the lid too close to the water level. Now I'm gonna put 2 teaspoons of salt in here as well. I don't want to overdo the salt. I just want to add a little flavor. You can always add more salt to the dish that you're using your stock for. You can add more salt, but you can't really take that salt away. So I try to be a little bit cautious with how much salt I'm adding to my broth when it's cooking. Okay, so if you wanna do this in your Instant Pot, you might have a little less capacity, which is why I switched to doing this in my slow cooker. It holds more. But if you're using a pressure cooker, you can obviously get it done quicker. You'd wanna make sure not to fill above this max fill line in here. That's your liquid max fill level. And I would let this cook on high for 2 to 3 hours on high pressure. And then you need to make sure that you let this release the pressure naturally before you take the lid off. And then if you're doing this on the stovetop, find yourself a suitably sized pot, fill it to about an inch below the top so that it's not gonna boil over. Bring it up to a boil, then turn it down to a simmer and let it simmer for 12 to 24 hours. I used to do it this way when I had an electric stovetop, but then now that I have gas, I find that liquid really cooks off of my food a lot quicker. So I would be hesitant to have something simmering unattended overnight. And I heard a cautionary tale a little while ago about a woman who left broth simmering on her stove and it cooked dry. It ended up burning and causing extensive smoke damage to her home. So if you're using your stove, mind that liquid level, don't let it go dry. And now I'm gonna turn my crock pot on to low and I'm gonna leave it for 24 hours. That's it. I'll be back to talk about straining it when it's done cooking. Okay, I am back. It's been about 24 hours as promised. My chicken stock is smelling amazing and it's time to get these bones and veggies strained out of here so that we're just left with the stock, because that's what we want, right? So when it comes to supplies, what you're gonna need for this, it really depends on what you have. Just use what you've got, get creative with the things you have in your kitchen. The point is we're getting bones and veggies separated. So maybe you have a colander, maybe you have a sieve, just use whatever. If you have a bigger sieve than I do, that would be helpful. I don't have a very big one. It's kind of small, but I tend to have sieves break on me all the time. We're just gonna roll with this. And I got this one off of a Buy Nothing group actually, because I took it with a whole box of other kitchen stuff that someone was giving away and I had to take everything, as these things sometimes tend to go. And the reason I wanted it was for this sieve, because it looks like the one that my mom had when I was a kid. And I don't know, it might still be going. Like, it seemed like that thing was indestructible. And so I thought, since I can't manage to get one to last for me, I should get this old one. And so far so good. It's still going strong. So I'm putting my bones and my veggies into this strainer sieve with a pair of tongs. And you don't want to really press these down. The reason being, you're gonna end up with cloudy stock if you do that. Also, I'm straining this over top of my batter bowl just because it's gonna make it easier to pour out of here afterward once this gets full. You can use whatever you want. Any kind of bowl is gonna work. The point is that you have something to suspend over another bowl so that the liquid can drain out and it's not sitting in the liquid, right? Now, don't squish it, is what I said. The reason being, you're gonna get cloudy stock. If you smush it down, it's gonna get kind of murky looking, and I don't know, that just doesn't look nice, especially if you're using this for a clear soup, like a chicken noodle soup. So don't smush it. Just let gravity do its thing. Save your muscles for kneading bread or something, but don't use them here. And now, there might be a few drops left in here, but I'm gonna say that's good enough. I'm gonna dump this into my food waste bucket. If you have food waste collection where you live, awesome, you can throw it in there. If you don't, just throw it in the garbage, because you've been very resourceful with these food scraps and it's time to say goodbye to them, because I don't think you're gonna get another use out of this. So now, after I get this all strained, then we'll talk about the next step, but I've got a bit more work to do here. So I'll talk to you again in a few minutes after I've pulled this all out of here. Okay, so I'm just grabbing a ladle because I've gotten most of the big stuff out of here, and now I need something a bit bigger to transfer the liquid over here. Okay, my sieve is starting to sit in the top of the liquid, so I need to drain this now. So the next step is getting the fat separated, and you can do this one of two ways. So in the past, until today, I have poured all my stock into a bigger bowl and then chilled it. And I do this because the fat, you can see it here even, this fat from chicken is called schmaltz. It rises to the top and then it needs to be removed, because if you leave it in your stock, it's gonna be too fatty. And normally I would just let it separate in the fridge, and then when I'm ready to use it or pack it away, I would take that layer of schmaltz off the top. You could save that and use it for cooking. Google it if you wanna know different ways to use it, or you can just toss it. But then I would transfer the stock to containers and I could freeze it or use it for soup. So that's how I would normally do it. It works, but it's a little bit extra work. Today I'm trying a different method because I got this new fat separator. And so I'm gonna give this a whirl. I got this from my two older boys. It was a Mother's Day present last year, but we were moving, so they made me an IOU. I said, you can give it to me once we've moved because I don't wanna have one more thing in my kitchen to move. So anyways, I looked online and America's Test Kitchen said that this was the best fat separator to use. And so that's what I went with. So I'm gonna just pour this stock into the fat separator. And just like in the batter bowl, the fat will rise to the top. And then you set this over your container that you're transferring it to. It's got this little lever on here and it lets the liquid out through the bottom. So the fat will just stay above the stock. And then once it gets down to the bottom, you just stop transferring it. So I think it'll work really well. But while that separates a little more, I will keep moving this into the batter bowl. Okay, now, since I don't have to remove the fat after I've cooled it, I'm going to transfer this directly into the containers that I'm gonna be freezing my stock in. How you freeze your stock will depend on what you wanna use it for. So you could use small containers if you wanna use it in small quantities. Wow, this is awesome. You could use ice cube trays if you just wanna be able to add a couple tablespoons or quarter cup or whatever. You can take small amounts and put them into your pan as you're cooking. I tend to just use better than bouillon if I just need a little bit of chicken flavor in what I'm cooking. So I am going to transfer this to a larger container that I can just toss in my freezer because I like to use it for soup and things like that. So yeah, I'm just using an old yogurt container and this fat separator is awesome. Down to the fat level. So now I'm gonna stop and that's amazing. I will leave a link for you in the description for this fat separator because I am in agreement with America's Test Kitchen that this is a really fantastic fat separator. They said that the old school kind with the spout, they can tend to be a little bit wasteful because even when you're your most careful, you'll still end up with some fat in your stock, or else you end up throwing away stock that's still usable because you didn't want to get too much fat in your container. So anyway, I'm not saving this. I'm gonna just toss this in my food waste as well. And then I can transfer the next batch over too. This thing also has, you probably saw, holes in the top to catch any solids that are in your stock. And so if you've used a sieve already, you're kind of getting a double protection. Am I gonna fit this? Just barely. Perfect. Okay, I'll let it sit for a minute and then I will move it over to this container. Okay, I think this is ready to go. This strainer reminds me of those brute tea brewers where you'd put your loose leaf tea inside and let it steep, and then you'd set it over your cup and it would just drain into your mug. Except I'm not brewing tea, I'm straining chicken broth. But yeah, I'm really happy with this thing. I've been talking about getting a fat separator for like, who knows how long. And I don't use it that often. I don't have a need for it often, and so I just never got around to buying myself one. And I am a very hard person to shop for. I don't want a lot of things. So it was really sweet of my boys to tell me last Mother's Day, we're buying you a fat separator. Pick the one you want and we'll pay for it. I think I made the right choice. Oop, how are we? Yeah, that was pretty easy, right? It's way cheaper than buying chicken broth from the store because you're basically making it from garbage. These are things you would have thrown away anyway. It's way better for you. So definitely give this a try. I'm gonna make some African lentil soup with this, probably in the next day or two. So I probably won't throw this in the freezer, but I could if I wanted to save it for later. Just as a reminder, if you weren't gonna use a fat separator, you could always do it like I mentioned before, chill it, take the fat off afterward, or you can try spooning the fat off while it's still hot because that's sometimes necessary. Before I had the fat separator, that's what I do anytime I was making gravy. If I made a turkey or a roast and I needed to make a gravy from those pan sauces, I would just kind of spoon it off because it rises to the top. But you end up wasting a lot of good stock when you do it that way. So firming it up or using a fat separator, definitely the way to go. Thank you for hanging out with me, and I will see you again soon.